Hi, welcome to Kiss Me, where we dive into all of our favorite rom-coms. I'm Andy H, and today we'll be looking at Forgetting Sarah Marshall, released in 2008. Directed by Nicolas Stoller, the film stars Jason Segal in his first leading role, which he also wrote and co-scored. Produced by Judd Apatow, the comedic duo worked previously on Freaks and Geeks, Undeclared, and 2007's Knocked Up. The film features a talented cast with fantastic one-liners,
the weather outside is weather,
and cringe-worthy songs. It delivers chest-grabbing laughs through the visible chemistry and improvisation throughout the movie. Mainly filmed at Turtle Bay Resort in Oahu, Hawaii, and the dramatic coastline of Lay Point, the movie was made for $30 million and smashed the box office at $105 million. The creative advertising for the movie clearly worked, but backfired on a few Sarah Marshalls, having their close confidants ask, "What the fuck did you do?" Unmotivated but very likable composer Peter Bretter is dumped by his famous 5-year girlfriend Sarah Marshall. Depressed and lonely, he makes his last-minute decision to go on a solo vacation to Hawaii, where unfortunately he runs into Sarah and her rock star professional sex god boyfriend. While we can't all relate to a devastating breakup while in the nude, we can certainly sympathize for Peter's heartbreak and the effort it takes to put yourself back together. The film offers a refreshing take on Sarah, who is not made out to be the bad guy, as she's trying to navigate her own struggles. It is a charming and raunchy rom-com that holds up over the years. So let's dive in. Peter, played by Jason Segal, is chilling at home and composing music. He's watching Access Hollywood while eating a massive bowl of Fruit Loops, and we learn about his famous girlfriend Sarah Marshall, played by Kristen Bell, who stars in Crime Scene, a CSI parody. Segal actually starred in 3 CSI episodes in 2004 and 2005, and thought the show was hilarious, hence including it within the script. Access Hollywood ends with the rocker Alda Snow, played by Russell Brand, singing out, "We've got to do something." Peter receives a call from Sarah explaining that she's arriving home early, so Peter rushes to hide his slobby tendencies. Freshly out of the shower, he greets Sarah in a towel. Sarah ends up breaking up with him, and he drops the towel, leaving nothing to our imagination. However, Segal didn't warn his mother about the nudity, so she found out during the premiere, reportedly bringing her to tears. Segal actually based the scene on a number of real-world breakups he has been through over the years. Yes, including one where he was dumped while naked. Peter's brother-in-law, Brian, played by SNL's vet Bill Hader, agrees to be a wingman to curb Peter's loneliness. Peter tries to get over his heartbreak by hooking up with random women and later regretting it, and goes to see his doctor, a pediatrician, giving scholar medical advice that his dick is beautiful and go out and use it. And so Peter does. There's a lot of sex scenes here which we won't show. Disappointed? Then go watch the movie. We find out that Peter composes music for Crime Scene. It's the same show that Sarah's a star with, Billy Baldwin. The random sex didn't fill Peter's void and takes out his frustration at Sarah on the screen. Peter locks himself at his apartment for days, only for Brian to force his way and be the landlord. Peter's burning all of the Costco Photo Center memorabilia of Sarah to Nothing Compares to You by Sinead O'Connor. Brian and Peter exchange an epic word rift, and Brian tells Peter to get his shit together. He deletes all digital photo evidence of Sarah and tells him to go on a Hawaiian vacation. Peter, on his way to Oahu, is stuck watching Crime Scene. Peter arrives at the hotel and again is randomly late. Okay, tasteless joke, moving on. And meets Rachel Jansen, played by Mila Kunis. Rachel explains that there's no vacancy at the hotel except for a $6,000 suite meant for Oprah. Peter declines but randomly sees Sarah and her new boyfriend, Alda Snow, and really wishes he didn't wear that fucking shirt. Rachel, seeing the uncomfortable exchange, offers Peter the room pro bono as long as he cleans it. Peter, just trying to get to his Oprah suite, makes Sarah paranoid that he is following them. Brian, speaking to Peter on the phone, yells at him just to go to your room. Peter decides to run into Sarah and Aldous, knowing that will ruin Sarah's day.
But he really didn't.
Peter's self-sorrow is interrupted by Rachel calling the room regarding noise complaints of a woman crying. Peter decides to pick himself back up and go down to dinner, where we meet Matthew, the waiter, played by Jonah Hill, thinking it is incredibly weird and sad that Peter is coming all alone. He sits Peter at the greatest table in the house. Lovely. Peter, surrounded with loving couples, needs to get out of there. Sarah confronts him, accuses him of talking to her assistant to follow her there. Peter denies it, and despite Sarah's suggestions for him to leave the hotel, Peter declares he loves it there and appreciates her consideration. The groupie whore and psycho stalker, such cute pet names, go into different directions. Peter ends up at the bar and downs a few drinks, even imitating Sex in the City. Cynthia Nixon, who plays Miranda in Sex in the City, can be spotted right there in the background. Peter meets Daryl, the newlywed who is nervous and stressed and very sexually frustrated, and he also sees Rachel. Peter goes back to sulk in his room, where he plays the 1976 The Muppet Show theme song, foreshadowing his and Stoller's team up for the Muppet movie in 2011.
That is awesome!
The next morning, at breakfast, his spirits lift a little higher, with the waiter providing extra rum with his breakfast, and he stumbles into a group yoga with an instructor played by Kristen Wiig, who has a liking for Aldous. Aldous Snow's character was originally intended to be played by Segal's friend, Charlie Hunnam, and to be very posh and refined. After Hunnam declined the role, it was offered to Brand, in which Segal rewrote his whole character, which Bran delivers effortlessly. Snow is the main character in the 2010 spin-off Get Him to the Greek, which also stars Jonah Hill, but as a different character. Peter escaping yoga meets Kunu, the Hawaiian name for Chuck, played by Paul Rudd. Peter, who gets surfing lessons from Kunu, end up chatting. You can see the improvisation and chemistry between Paul and Segal's bromance, and will further continue in 2029's I Love You Man. Peter Skypes Brian, who encourages him to go out and meet new people, including to get to know Rachel better. Peter heads over to the luau, where Aldous Snow is called up on stage in his hot leather pants performing Inside of You, dedicating it to Sarah. Segal apparently wrote this song intending to be the worst possible song an ex-boyfriend could hear his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend sing. Peter, escaping later, asks Rachel to a party. She finally tells him to go change his Tommy Bahamas t-shirt, and they end up bonding over at the beach. Rachel is happy in Hawaii and glad she stopped school, where Peter expresses how unhappy he is with his life and job, and they really wants to finish his Dracula rock opera. Rachel's cheater ex-boyfriend shows up and Peter gets into a fist fight. Rachel and Peter escape to a local bar where Peter starts to see the real contrast between Rachel and Sarah. Peter, off to take a pee, learns of the walls plastered with topless pictures of women. One of them is Rachel, which Peter offers to take down, but she explains to him that there's no chance it will happen without getting physically hurt. Next we see Peter, via Rachel's doing, being called up to stage to perform his Dracula rock opera. Segal actually wrote this song a few years before and played it for Judd Apatow, to which he responded,
You can't play this for anybody, ever.
And it ended up in the movie as a joke instead. Rachel drops Peter off and avoids his kiss, with Peter acting as a complete gentleman, regardless of the rejection. Peter goes to the bar, sees Chuck, who has no recollection of him, and the guys explain to Peter that it was not a date with Rachel, since she is in customer service, and that he must assume that strippers like him as well. The next day, Sarah finds out about her TV show Crime Scene being cancelled. As Sarah is trying to come to terms with minimal support from Aldous, Matthew interrupts and casually gives Aldous his demo for him to listen. Peter runs into Sarah and asks if she is alright. Sarah expresses her raw feeling of being concerned about stepping out of the spotlight. Oddly enough, Belle's show Veronica Mars was cancelled one day prior to filming the scene, allowing her to draw on her raw and real emotion. And meanwhile, Aldous is teaching the newlywed sex positions with chess pieces. Rachel invites Peter out and they go on a hike, further encouraging Peter to finish his rock opera, where Peter has no ambition. Rachel suggests for him just to jump off the side of the cliff, and she leaps. Peter, terrified, slips and hangs off the edge. This freaks the both of them out. Peter pushes off the rock to land safely in the water, and they both end up kissing from the fear rush. Peter gets word that Dakota Fanning and her entourage need a room, so they moved him to the only room now available. Great. Sarah, asking for restaurant recommendations, speaks with Rachel, prying into her and Peter's relationship. And they do the "no, you are so pretty, no, you are" ping pong match. Later, Peter and Aldous are hanging out on the surfboards, with Aldous confessing to Peter that he heard a track on Sarah's iPod of Peter's rock opera, saying it was dark, gothic, Neil Diamond. Peter says to Aldous, "Fuck you are cool," which is super hard for him to say because he hates him in so many ways. We find out that Aldous and Sarah actually slept together a year ago. Peter, pissed, explains this isn't Europe and there are rules here. They part, and Peter finally catches a wave and runs straight into Aldous. This brings them both ashore, and Peter faints while he pulls out the large coral from Aldous' leg. Where's Ant-Man when you need him? Oh, there he is, making fun of Aldous' British accent.
You sound like you're from London.
Peter wakes up in Sarah's room with Aldous still passed out and confronts Sarah's cheating. Sarah explains that it was hard to take care of Peter when he stopped taking care of himself, and reminds him of the week where he just wore sweatpants. Okay, that must have been pre-COVID times, right? That night, Sarah, frustrated by Aldous, complaining about wearing a shirt that she picked out for him, runs into Rachel and Peter and suggests a dinner together. Aldous thinks this is a terrible situation since she was wearing this shirt all night. Drinks are flowing freely, with Aldous sticking to cranberry due to sobriety, and they riffed on Sarah's previous acting role, specifically calling out the stinker about a killer cell phone. Look up Bell's 2006 movie Pulse. Aldous, who proceeds to ruin his beloved shirt with cranberry juice. Rachel, listening to Sarah, giving her a hard time about her life, and that it would be hard to live in Hawaii, proceeds to kiss Jason. Matthew interrupts, asking Aldous about his demo, which Aldous famously responds, "I was going to listen to your CD, but I went on living my life." The couples head back to their rooms, and sexual competition ensues through the thin walls, with Aldous realizing Sarah is still in love with Peter and breaks up with her. Next day, Peter sees Aldous leaving and goes to check on Sarah if she's doing okay. Sarah initiates moves on Peter, and Peter initially rejects her, but then gives in and then later rejects. Peter runs off to tell Rachel, who asks for a play-by-play, which is basically a lollipop lick of the tip. And Rachel breaks it off with Peter. Peter demonstrates his love for Rachel by returning beaten up with a topless photo from her from the bar, and heads back to LA. Initially depressed, Peter starts getting his life together. He starts to exercise and writes his Dracula opera. Peter ends up sending Rachel an invitation to his Dracula show, and Rachel shows up in LA. Rachel sees Peter and his friends perform the Dracula musical using puppets made by Jim Henson's shop. The ending was specifically wrote this way since they wanted to do something unique and different than a random rom-com. They end up hugging, and we see more of Segal's tasteful dad-body nudity and another kiss. And don't worry about Sarah, as she lands on her feet in another crime show co-starring Michael Bluth in Animal Instincts.
Please tell your friends about this show.
Alright, so now we're down to the awards. Okay, so for Best Kiss, it is the adrenaline kiss in the water. It is not forced. It's also a feel-good moment for Peter after being previously rejected by Rachel, and it is a sign that Peter is finally moving on. There are a lot of cringe-worthy moments within this movie. Actually, so much that it is incredibly hard to pick one. Ooh, he must be stuck there. When Peter goes on to check with Sarah after Aldous' breakup and she attempts to hook up with him, it is funny Peter claiming that his cock does not want to be around her anymore. But you want Peter to run very fast away. Run, Peter, run! At least Peter realized that was a mistake and he goes to tell Rachel the truth of what happened. Show us some love. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tag that alert bell to dive into further awkward but sweet encounters of our favorite rom-coms. Also pop in your suggestions of which movies are your favorites. Until then, I'm Andy H, and this is Kiss Me. Pucker up.
Wow.